Aphorism 207. How- However gratefully one may go to welcome an objective spirit, and who has not been sick to death of everything subjective, and its occurs ipsumosity. In the end, one has to learn to be cautious with one's gratitude, and to put a stop to the exaggerated way in which the depersonalization of the spirit is today celebrated as redemption and transfiguration, as if it were the end in itself, as if usually the case within the pessimist school, which also has good reason to accord the highest honors to disinterested knowledge. The objective man who will no longer scold or curses as the pessimist does, the ideal scholar in whom the scientific instinct, after thousandfold total and partial failure, for once comes to full bloom, is certainly one of the most precious instruments there are. But he belongs in the hand of one who is mightier. He is only an instrument, let us say, a mirror. He is not an end in himself. And the objective man is in fact a mirror, accustomed to submitting to whatever wants to be known, lacking any other pleasure than that provided by knowledge, by mirroring. He waits until something comes along and then gently spreads himself out, so that even not the lightest footsteps and the fluttering of ghostly beings shall be lost in his sacrifice, and in the surface of his skin. However still remains to him of his own person seems to be accidental, often capricious, often more disturbing, so completely has his become a passage and reflection of forms and events not his own. He finds it an effort to think about himself, and not infrequently he thinks about himself mistakenly. He can easily confuse himself with another. He fails to understand his own needs, and is in this respect alone, unsubtle and negligent. Perhaps he is troubled by his health, or by the pettiness and stuffness of his wife and friends, or by a lack of companions and company. Yes, he forces himself to reflect on his troubles, but in vain. Already his thoughts are roaming off to a more general case, and tomorrow he will know as little how to help himself as he did yesterday. He no longer knows how to take himself seriously, nor does he have the time for it. He is cheerful, not because he has no troubles, but because he has no fingers and facility for dealing with his troubles. He habitual going out to welcome everything and every experience, the sunny and ingenious hospitality with which he accepts all he encounters, his inconsiderate benevolence, his perilous unconcernedness over yes and no. Alas, how often he has to suffer for these he virtues. And as a human being, in general, he can all too easily come to caput mortuum of these virtues. If love and hatred are demanded of him, I mean love and hatred as God, woman and animal understand them. He will do what he can and give what he can, but one ought not to be suppressed if it is not very much. If he proves spurious, surprising, brittle, questionable, and soft, his love and his hatred are artificial, and more of a tour de force, a piece of vanity and exaggeration, for he is genuine only when he can be objective. Only in his cheerful totalism can he remain nature and natural. His mirroring soul, forever polishing itself, no longer knows how to affirm or how to deny. He does not command, neither does he destroy. In nem impres prisque rem, he says with Leipzig. One should not overlook nor underestimate the Prisque, nor is he an exemplar. He never leads nor follows. He sets himself altogether too far off to have any reason to take sides between good and evil. When he was for so long confused with the philosopher, with the Caesarean cultivator and Gewaltmensch of culture, he was gone too much he was done too much great honor, and what is essential in him was overlooked. He was an instrument, something of a slave, if certainly the sublimest kind of slave, but in himself he is nothing. Sque rem. The objective man is an instrument, a precious, easily damaged and tarnished measuring instrument, reflecting apparatus which ought to be respected and taken care of. But he is not an end, a termination, an ascent, a complementary man, in whom the rest of existence is justified, a conclusion, and even less a beginning, a begetting, a first cause, something solid, powerful, and based firmly on itself, that wants to be master, but rather only a delicate, empty, elegant, flexible mold, which has first to wait for some content, so as to form itself by it. As a rule, a man without content, a selfless man. Consequently, nothing for women either. In parentheses. Welcome. On the previous episode of Dragon Ball Z, Nietzsche seamlessly and critically maneuvered through his mind while walking in Sault Maries, or Genoa, or Nice, and thought of this chapter, we the scholars, and he advocated dutifully of how a scholar person shall act, not as a mandate, but as a hypothesis. But while venturing through his lucid mind, he illustrated this other man, the man of science, which is another form of the scholar, in this episode of Dragon Ball Z. How shall he observe and critique the objective man? He simply begins first with, how shall an objective spirit be welcomed in the world? As if something objective, something ipsimus, is sick to death. Ipsumosity is a coined word from Nietzsche. It derives from the Latin phrase which is difficult to translate, ipsimus, or the ipsima, which that translates to high self-ist, or the higher self-most. But in ipsumosity, it translates to self-referentiality, so self-referral. He continues forward that the subjective in self-creation or ipsumosity is sick to death due to the objective spirit. In the end, one has learned to be cautious with one's gratitude to, and put to a stop to the exaggerated way in which the depersonalization of the spirit is today celebrated as redemption and transfiguration, as if it were the end in itself, as is usually the case within the pessimist school, which also has gone to a great reason to accord his highest honors to disinterested knowledge. What Nietzsche is observing is that among the pessimist school, including Arthur Schopenhauer, his predecessor and mentor at one time, he's realizing that among the pessimist school, they're depersonalizing or repressing or degrading the spirit to decadence in the form of asceticism or nihilistic despair, where the will is causing suffrage, and that the simple pleasures in life are alleviating that pain, whilst at the same time, it doesn't eliminate, it doesn't quell, it doesn't soothe the pain. It's a continual cycle of to and fro of pain, no pain. No pain, pain. Till we inevitably die. But while this is a pessimistic perspective, Schopenhauer, including the pessimists, before Schopenhauer, implied, sometimes dogmatically as doctrine, that to negate the will to thrive, to expand, to create, to discharge. And that suffocating the will, you suffocate the power. Once you suffocate the power, you suffocate the character inside that power. And Nietzsche says, stop doing this to the spirit. Stop thinking this is a redemption, that this is a transfiguration. It is not. Till it is claimed as the highest honors of disinterested knowledge. Now, he transitions the spirit to a physical person. The objective man who no longer scolds or curses, as the pessimist does. The ideal scholar in whom the scientific instinct, after a thousandfold, total and partial failure for once comes to full bloom, is certainly one of the most precious instruments there are. But he belongs in the hand of one who is mightier. He is only an instrument, let us say a mirror. He is not an end in himself. This is another form of the scholar. We have three scholars now: objective man, man of science, and the scholar himself, which Nietzsche correlates and rephrases every time. And this is the arduousness of Nietzsche, where, and this is a partial deviation for clarification, where Nietzsche would say sun or dark, he'll say it one time in that context, but he'll say it again in the same aphorism for another context. Say, for example, in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where Zarathustra is staring at the sun, and at dawn, where the sun is in its totality ascended for everyone to observe. A truth entered Zarathustra's mind. The truth was to seek harvesters, creators, and joyous people in life. True friends. While at the same time, he says, "O sun, how you shine upon me, but once you go down in life, I will too go down. And you would shine your light in the underworld where people would become so sour, so ravaged, so recoiled, that you're showing truth to them. You're making a fool's errand a fool. So I will too, inside myself, and to the people too." He says the same thing with scholar in this sense. Rephrase the word scholar for free spirit, and a scholar for someone who's extraordinary, who's abnormal, and peculiar to the majority or the hoi polloi in this sense. But this is a negative part of him, where he says the ideal scholar has the scientific instinct. This is the other scholar, he said in the previous aphorism, the man of science, with his industriousness, patient acknowledgement for his position in rank, uniformity, and his position in life for for the desperation of a good name. But while he's conducting his work, he has an inner distrust, a poignancy of a dependent man with domesticated animal instincts. All at the same time, this man of science, he's unauthoritative, he's subservient, he's not self-sufficient, for he depends on scientific stimuli. This scholar, the objective man, he'll say, vividly. Hear closely. He is an instrument, a mirror, but not an end in himself. And after this vivid description of him, I'll compare it to the last man. The objective man is in fact a mirror, accustomed to submitting to whatever wants to be known, lacking any other pleasure than that provided by knowledge, by mirroring or reflecting. He waits until something comes along and then gently spreads himself out, so that even in the lightest footsteps and the flattering of ghostly beings shall be lost on his surface, his sacrifice, and his skin. AKA, everyone is a mere product to this person's environment and history. Whatever still remains in him of his own person, at parentheses, own person, seems to him accidental, often capricious, more often disturbing, so completely has he become a passage, a reflection of forms and events not his own. He finds in an effort to think about himself, and not infrequently he thinks about himself, mistakenly. He can easily confuse himself with another. He fails to understand his own needs, and is in this respect alone unsubtle and negligent. First, he described that everybody in the environment and history is a mere product of him. He simply absorbs information while lacking, or as Nietzsche said, unstable or unsubtle, and neglecting a true self, which implies he's becoming selfless from this description, and we'll arrive at that. While at the same time, every assured or convinced idea, every person he esteems, and every environment he participates in, he simply reflects. He's a mere instrument. And that reflection isn't him in the moment of, let me do this, let me do that. It's mirroring. He's reflecting the same frequency and character as everybody. But at the same time, he lacks a self. He lacks ambition. He is not himself. While it's crucial to think of this too, and Nietzsche acknowledged this at times. Well, he acknowledges this, but he still possesses the Promethean instinct and prowess, which in modernity is lacking. Nietzsche realizes that nobody can create themselves in isolation while excluding others, because others affect that isolation, which justifies this is not a negative approach, but this is a positive approach now. It was a negative approach. No, it wasn't. It was a realization of why nobody can create themselves from isolation. But this justifies why Nietzsche loves the good, the high-spirited, the wanton solitude for the, the free spirits, good conscience, and the scholars. If people don't remember this, but the subtitle of Beyond Good and Evil is A Prelude to a Philosophy of the Future. If people immediately say, is that the negative part of his philosophy? It's not. He envisaged a higher self, both him, but in the future beyond him. Plausibly in the future that he's conceiving of our time, or beyond our time, with the extra moral age. Watch my previous videos to comprehend what I'm saying of the extra moral age. So, the objective man, to remember, unambitious, selfless, subservient but reflective. He's a mirror, a mere instrument, while while absorbing knowledge for the sake of knowledge. But is he a pessimist? No, he deviates from that side because once we arrive at it, it will be said. We digress. Whatever still remains to him of his own person. Oh, I've said this. um, Perhaps he is troubled by his health, or by the pittiness and stuffness of his wife and friends, or by a lack of companions and company. Yes, he forces himself to reflect on his troubles, but in vain and futility. Already his thoughts are roaming off to a more general case, and tomorrow he will know as little how to help himself as he did yesterday. He no longer knows how to take himself seriously, nor does he have the time for it. He is cheerful, not because he has no troubles, but because he has no fingers and faculty for dealing with his troubles. It's this wheel of bewilderment that I've previously said. But it's an early sign that he's indecisive. He can't position himself on what side. Hence why Nietzsche hysterically said of his wife, the stuffness and the pittiness of his wife and friends, while in the absence or lacking of company and companions to challenge him. I added that. Nietzsche did it, but it implies Nietzsche did. But this individual, he asserts himself to reflect of the vague thoughts that appear in his mind. So he's reflecting in vain. Which I immediately thought of a passage in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where Zarathustra arrives at a person or a pedestrian from the Pied Cow village. And this person's roaming, he's a wanderer, he roams both physically and mentally, and he's indecisive upon his thoughts, upon his actions, till he hears the voice of Zarathustra complimenting and dutifully illustrating how a tree works both on a natural scale and a human scale. And this individual said, I hear the voice of Zarathustra. I hear the prophet. That's what I immediately think now. But that person in Zarathustra immediately aligns with the side of Zarathustra. But this person doesn't. Not in the sense of Zarathustra, but he doesn't align himself with sides. Hence, indecisiveness. He continues forward. His habitual going out to welcome everything and every experience the sunny and ingenious hospitality with which he accepts all he encounters, his inconsiderate benevolence, his perilous unconcernedness over yes and no. Alas, how often he has to suffer, for these are his virtues. This is a fascinating position. While he's indecisive of his decisions, he appears selfless, benevolent, genial. But he has this perilous or serious unconcern of a yes or no because he acts selflessly. Excuse me. As a human being, in general, he can all too easily become the caput mortuum of these virtues. What's caput mortuum? Caput mortuum is a Latin term for money, mummy brow. There's that. It's the connotation of a useless substance after after incineration or a chemical operation. But at the same time, it's another term. It's used in alchemy as a form of sublation, not in a Nietzschean sense of sublation, but it's a symbol of decay and degradation. You can use the alchemic term for this situation, but as we observed previously with Nietzsche, he loves to use other parts of Latin terms. That's solely Latin, but French, German, Italian, and Portuguese at times. He uses the alternative version of these terms. So it's the decay and degradation of this man's virtues. Thus, it doesn't conclude inside himself because it's devouring himself. Why doesn't it devour him wholly? Because he's fueling that incinerator. Similar to a stomach, I think it replenishes itself, what, every 2 or 3 weeks before it devours itself? Use that stomach analogy. If love and hatred are demanded of him, I mean love and hatred as God. Woman and animal understand them. He will do what he can and give what he can. But one ought not to be surprised if it is not very much, if he proves spurious, brittle, questionable, soft. There's an immediate quote I think of when he said women. It's from Sigmund Freud. Quote, women should if I could stop stuttering, women should soften, but not weaken a man. This individual is weakened, well, questionable. He's fragile, spurious, whilst at the same time expansive to everybody as a mere product, as a mere tool, as an instrument, a mirror. In the mirror portion, if I didn't clarify, it's both on the physiological and psychological position because he's reflecting knowledge that he's absorbed from other people while cycling inside his head of I should know this, I should know this, I should know this. He's tormenting himself. His love and his hatred are artificial and more of a tour de force. Tour de force, in this sense, well, before I define it, a piece of vanity and exaggeration. A tour de force is an exceptional accolade from artist, author, and an individual that pales unequally to everyone outside of this person, which Nietzsche would agree. And in this sense, the objective man's love and frustration is artificial, it's superficial, and it's false. Because he has this tour de force where it's the great veracity and strength. He's practically forcing himself to be reflective, benevolent, and unambitious, while at the same time selfless. That definition of tour de force, Nietzsche would immediately agree with that term. But because he uses this in a negative context to critique this version of a scholar, it's crucial to grasp of why everything after Zarathustra is a negative philosophy of Nietzsche, with some positive. For he is genuine only when he can be objective. Rewrite the word objective to altruistic and selfless. Only in his cheerful totalism can he remain natural and nature. His reflective or mirroring soul, forever polishing itself, no longer knows how to affirm or how to deny. He does not command, neither does he destroy. To quote Leibniz, I think the German philosopher, rationalist too, Johannes von Leibniz. Je ne me presque rien. He says, with Leibniz, one should not overlook or underestimate the presque. That French phrase is, I despise almost nothing. And Nietzsche says, do not overlook, do not underestimate the almost or presque part. Nor is he an exemplar. He neither leads nor follows. He sets himself altogether too far off to any reason to take sides between good and evil. This clarifies and justifies what I was saying earlier of a man who's indecisive, nor can align himself with one side. He can never act good, nor appear as evil, or in some sense, never act evil, nor appear as good. He doesn't affirm, he doesn't annihilate, he doesn't deny, he doesn't command, for he despises nothing. When he was for so long confused with the philosopher, with the Caesarian cultivator, and Gewaltmensch of culture. Violent man is the German translation of Gewaltmensch. No, Gewaltmensch. He was done too much too great of an honor, and what is essential in him was overlooked. He is instrument, something of a slave. He's certainly the sublimest kind of slave, but in himself he is nothing. Sque ren, almost nothing. He's describing that while being puzzled as a scholar or philosopher in some sense, and absorbing or a Caesarian cultivator, and experiencing this violent man of and participating in the violent man of culture, this great valor is essentially overzealous and beyond his comprehension. Because again, he simply absorbs. He can't fathom with him. He can't reconcile nor fathom why his endeavors lead to guilt, to mortification, to an inferior state, and be powerless. This isn't me pitying him, nor Nietzsche. There's a misconception where Nietzsche says he's gentle, you must take care of him. And he simply says this, the objective man is an instrument, a precious, easily damaged and tarnished measuring instrument, and reflecting apparatus or tool, which ought to be respected and taken good care of, but he is not an end. A termination and an ascent, a complementary man in whom the rest of existence is justified, a conclusion, and even less a beginning, a begetting, and first cause, something solid, powerful, and based firmly on itself that wants to be a master. That justifies why Nietzsche has zero empathy nor pity this objective man, but rather only a delicate, empty, elegant, flexible mold, which has first to wait for some content so as to form itself by it. AKA, now he's dependent on form to be elegant. As a rule, a man without content, a stuffless man. Consequently, nothing for women either. In parentheses. You, the viewer, may be free spirits. conceive why he added woman in this sense. I have my hypotheses, but I'm not expressing. It's confidential. Now, time for the section where I compare or juxtapose, say, the last man and the objective man. The last man and objective man are parallel, but differentiate because the latter, aka the objective man, is selfless, lacking ambition, identity. He's not. He's in. He's fragile and indecisive, while at the same time not a identitarian. And people would say, well, isn't it the last man itself? Well, the last man possesses a self, but adheres to adheres to the lack of the highest values. They prefer the inferior values, or they were transformed as the superior values, while the once superior values became the inferior. My mustache is great today. So there's parallelism between the two. One lacks a self. One possesses a self, but in weakness, resentment, guilt. For it prefers a simpler life. That is the last man. The objective man, he doesn't entirely believe or adhere to something, nor entirely conjures ideas to form himself. What he said earlier, to form by itself, he's, in parentheses, criticizing this individual who becomes formless, selfless, and an altruistic, benevolent person with compassion. There's a link in the description to the Men's Academy. I'm inside. Amor fati. Love your fate.